Hello, good game. Welcome back, ghouls and goblins. Thank you so much for taking the time to support the channel. I hope you're all having a magical day. Today, we'll break down 25 new Kamigawa Neon Dynasty decks. I've been teasing you in the recent videos, showcasing a spreadsheet, and we've put some serious work into it today. Probably 6 to 10 hours deep within these builds. Like I said, there are 25 new decks to go through in this video. We'll break down the strategies, the synergies, talk about the general archetype, just so you get an idea of what each deck entails. And then I'm asking each and every one of you to let me know in the comments below what decks you are most excited about seeing from the list I showcased today. This will influence the order at which they are produced to the YouTube channel. Deal? Cool beans. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel as well to help support it. Heck, maybe even tell a couple friends. All right, so let's take a look at 25 new Kamigawa Neon Dynasty decks. And then afterwards, if we somehow are able to make it through this, we're going to talk about some limited archetypes as well. Let's go. Alrighty, well, we made it through the intro. Let's go. Let me just quickly exit these tabs. And then first up is green-white modify / landfall. This is a mid-range aggro deck, or an aggressive mid-range deck, I should say, that looks to focus on Kodama of the West Tree. This is a 3-drop with reach. Modified creatures you control have trample. Whenever a modified creature you control deals combat damage to a player, search your library for a basic land card, put it into the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. This fits perfectly with Felidar Retreat. Whenever a land enters the battlefield, you may choose one. Create a 2/2 cat beast creature token, or put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Those creatures gain vigilance until the end of turn. They will not only be +1/+1 with vigilance, but now through the West Tree, they'll also have trample. When they deal combat damage, we're putting more lands into play tapped, which triggers the retreat even further. It doesn't stop there. There's a ton of more landfall within the build, which is really exciting. Moving on to green and white enchantments. Key cards here. Brilliant Restoration. Sorcery speed for 7, returning all artifact and enchantment cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. Holy Toledos. Can anyone say a Merchant Ultimatum? And then we have fun things like the Teachings of Kiran. Mill 3 cards, create a spirit, put +1 counters, and then finally transform into a creature itself, which is really cool. So good value here. It is a enchantment self-mill deck. We can self-mill with Ren and 7. And then, like I said, bringing everything back with the Brilliant Restoration. Of course, Hollowed Haunting is in here. Weaver of Harmony to kind of double some of those effects, and it goes on and on. So this is a very exciting deck. Moving on now to Mardu Enchantments. This actually got some serious loving. Tribute to Hirobi is not necessarily a key card, but one of the upgrades that it received, you know, making a rat ×2, and then when you flip it, you gain control of those rats. When they die, they sacrifice, right? So this is very good because, you know, we're playing it as an enchantment on top of the Hollowed Haunting, plus it makes token creatures, which is really what it's all about. So Hollowed Haunting, you know, whenever you play an enchantment, make the spirits. You guys are probably familiar with this. It's not a new card. Then you've got the Meat Hook in here as well with the Wedding Announcement, Felidar's Retreat, Stesnia Uprising, all of these enchantments that also create creature tokens as well, right? Very cool stuff here. But yeah, the Reckoner Raid is here as well as a new card, and we have the Dockside Chef as an enchantment creature, which is really cool. So, you know, this is going to be a creature in front of the hook itself, plus it triggers the Hollowed Haunting, and it can sack to draw, so there's some really cool synergies newly incorporated within this build. Moving on now to Abzan Enchantments. This is a little bit different, right? We've seen the green and white enchantments where we're, you know, milling, putting everything into play, and then we've seen kind of the typical mid-range grindy enchantments where we're just making a ton of tokens. We've got the Meat Hook, and then we're just grinding out the match. And now Abzan Enchantments is kind of the best of both worlds, right? So core cards here, Spirit Sister's Calling at the beginning of your end step for 5 mana as an enchantment. Choose a target permanent card in your graveyard. You may sacrifice a permanent that shares a card type with the chosen card. If you do, return the card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and it gains if this permanent would leave the battlefield, exile it instead of putting it anywhere else. So this is fantastic. So bringing back an enchantment every single end step. Very, very good. And one of the best enchantments that we can bring back is the Kami War. This is a new 6-mana saga. Exile target non-land permanent that an opponent controls. Then return target permanent non-land to their hand. Then they discard. And then exile and transform it. Its base, power, and toughness 6/6 with flying and trample. And it gets +X/+O. Whenever it attacks, defending player chooses a non-land card in your graveyard. Then return that card to our hand. So that recursion is really, really nice here. And then it gets a power buff. So a little bit different, you know, kind of sending sagas to the grave. Things like Binding of the Old Gods that gets value as it enters, it ramps, and then we can sacrifice it before it sacrifices itself, which is really cool because we don't want the death touch. We've got lots of things down that path. Storm the Festival just kind of to flood for us. There's the Planeswalkers, but really just the Sisters Call, Kami War is really what we're trying to get to. Again, trying to mill with Ren 7 and flood the field with Storm. So, without getting too bogged down, let's move on now to Jeskai Valley. Now, this is an extreme mid-range deck. This is expensive. Invoke Justice is one of the core cards here. Sorcery speed for 5. Return target permanent card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Then distribute 4 +1/+1 counters among any number of vehicles and or creatures that target player controls, right? So, bringing back Villamachus at Lorehold, it's going to be now a 9/9. Which is pretty crazy, and that will basically allow you to free cast something like the Magma Opus, which would be pretty ridiculous, right? With Galvanic Iteration, if we want to copy things, Angel Fire Ignition, of course, is fantastic for for the wipe. And then I guess another core card here that we could potentially bring back instead of Veli would be the Jin Gataxis, right? Doubling or copying our artifacts, instant sorceries, and countering our opponents, which is really cool. So just kind of an extreme mid-range deck. Of course, once Veli's powered up, it can cast the Seagate, it can cast Emiria's Call for free, which is pretty gosh darn ridiculous. Moving on now to the Chariot Mill. Now, this is an exciting deck. Turn 1 and turn 2, we're looking to self-mill. Of course, we already showed you the teachings of Kiran on turn 2. Still trying to nail down which turn 1 mill we want for the build. And then on turn 3, we're playing the Grease Fang. This is the core card here. The Akiba Boss for 3. It's a 4/3 legendary creature rat pilot. At the beginning of combat on your turn, return target vehicle card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste. Return it to the target. Return it to its owner's hand at the beginning of your next end step. So on turn 1, on turn 2, we're trying to mill the Chariot, and then turn 3, the boss comes into play. It will put the Chariot in. The Chariot will make the 2 cats. Then the Chariot will get bounced back to our hand, which is fairly exciting, right? So the Grease Fang is, super exciting. Of course, that Chariot is also going to gain haste, make another cat, and then come back to our hand and then get replayed. So 3 cats. Then it gets bounced, replayed for another 2 cats. So that's going to be 5 cats by turn 4 with the Chariot. Plus, you've got the boss in play as well. So you can kind of see how the Chariot Mill is going to pile up very, very aggressively. Like, that is a nasty feeling aggro deck. Moving on, shifting gears a little bit into the Azorius Wandering. Tempo beautiful. So white and blue. The Wandering Emperor is a new card here. 4 mana, 3 loyalty planeswalker with flash. When it enters, you can activate loyalty at instant speed. Putting counter on creature, giving it first strike. That's pretty good for a tempo build, right? To increase the power of your attackers every turn is fantastic, especially without having to lower your guard thanks to the flash. Then we can create a creature. That's pretty decent as well. And then straight up remove or exile tapped creature and gain 2 life. So this is such a good card within Azorius Tempo. And then just building around it like we typically would. Hermit is here as a creature and it can counter Fading Hope to bounce. Selfless Samurai, a new card which is so beautiful. sacrifice it to give something else indestructible until the end of turn. We love it. We love it. We love it. Allenbach Escort, similar fashion, but that creature will need a +1/+1 counter. We have the Luminarch for +1/+1 counters, which is pretty cool. The Soul of Kamigawa can give something else indestructible with Flash, which is, again, really, really cool. So just kind of giving everything indestructible and then doomscarring our opponent's creatures while still retaining our own value, which is pretty exciting. So I think there's going to be a couple different versions of this that I work towards. Of course, this is more of an aggressive, indestructible, I survive, I win build, but there is also a more counter spell oriented brew, which I think that we will get to in the coming days. Moving on, Kameo stuff. I didn't really know what to call this deck, but I wanted to build something with Kameo Completed Sage, as this will be the core card. Legendary Planeswalker with Phyrexian mana, so you can pay 4 mana and 2 life to get this out, or just cast it for 5 if you don't want to pay that life. And then this is a fairly decent tempo, tapping something it doesn't untap. You can grab a token of something from your grave or a notebook to draw and reduce the cost of your spells, which is, it's all right. It's not an emblem. And then, just kind of lacing in there with Juan defends the temple for 3. Ramp, counters, sure, who cares? But we really like the backside here, the Rising Star. And whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay X when you do put X +1/+1 counters on that creature. And then we have 5 modified creatures. This is going to be a 7/7 with flying, which is pretty goofy, right? So it's really cool to play big creatures and put a bunch of counters on them. I don't know if you guys seen the March instant speed. You can exile green cards from your hand, and it'll cost 2 less to cast to put a creature card with mana value X or less from your library into play with the same name as a creature in play, which is really, really cool. So, flooding the field with a creature at instant speed is a lot of fun. And then, Hullbreaker Horror, the most BM card that ever has been. I know you probably don't care about it. There's the Boundless Sky here as well. Bouncing things is kind of the name of the game, ramping up as well, which is quite nice. So, not a particularly attractive deck, but I do think that Timeo is going to get the job done through the ability to continually tap things, right? So, I don't know if it's going to be in a Bant build or the Simic build. I'm kind of leaning towards the Bant to give you access to the Doomscar, stuff like this, but it's going to be a learning process, right? Moving on now to Esper Artifacts. Oh, wow. The reality chip is crazy. Tezzeret is absolutely insane. I have Magda blinked here for some reason. We'll have to fix that. But we have Tezzeret, Jin Gitaxis, reality chip, the Mindlink mech. There are so many bangers in this build. The Soul Ripper, the Prototype, the Circuit Mender. It's all very, very aggressive. And even the Proto-G prototype, I'm really looking forward to that as well. So this is just going to be a classic deck, filling the field with value. We may need to balance a little bit of removal in this build, as that is kind of what it's missing. But at the end of the day, that's something that we still have to kind of feel out for ourselves within the meta to get a good idea of how much we'll actually need. Moving on, Dimir Ninjutsu. This deck seems to be pretty good. Rats and Rogues are the name of the game. The Moon Sage's Scion. This card is goofy. For 3 mana only, Ninjutsu for 4. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, exile the top card of each player's library until the end of turn. You may play one of those cards. If you do so, to cast the spell, you can pay life rather than its mana cost. That's not okay, man. It's not okay to hurt people like that, man. So that's kind of what it's all about. Of course, the Thousand Face Shadow is fantastic as well. It's a 1/1 with flying. When it enters the battlefield, if it does so attacking with the ninjutsu ability, you can create a token that's a copy of another attacking your creature. And that token will be tapped and attacking as well, which is really, really goofy. I do think it fits fantastic with something like the Biting Palm Ninja. There's legendaries that you can't really grab, but that ninja of the Biting Palm feels fantastic, right? So 3/3, and then it enters the battlefield with a menace counter on it. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you remove a menace counter from it. When you do, they reveal their hand, you get to exile a card from it, right? So if you're copying hand hate like that, I think it could be pretty decent. And of course, you know, Kaido is the Planeswalker. Draw a discard, which is great. Create the unblockable creature, and then, you know, just grabbing a blue or black creature, you know, right into play, which is pretty goofy. You know, whenever you're dealing combat damage to a player, which is quite nice. And probably just, you know, grabbing the Toad. Nothing too silly. You could try to put something more aggressive in, but I'm not entirely sure how often we're going to be hitting that emblem. But I do know that you'll need to survive on the way there. The Toad is nice here too, if we can get there. You know, it makes the unblockable, the 3/3 that can't be blocked, which is very good. We can cast enchantments to drain them, in which the deck does have a fair bit as well, like the Reckoner Raid, the Tribute. You know, these are some nice enchantments. Rogues class as well to get the job done there through the life drain. Moving on now to Rakdos Aggro. This is actually a fairly exciting deck. Some new things here. Blade of Ani for 2. It's a 3/1 with Menace. Equipped creature is base power and toughness of 5/5. Reconfigure for 4, right? So that's just fairly decent value. You know, 3/1 with Menace. Lizard Blades, similar thing where it's an artifact, creature, equipment, lizard. So it's a creature or an equipment. Double strike, right? So how can you complain with that? We love it. And then, you know, giving the Bloodveil Purveyor double strike, right? It already has flying, it already has trample. It's a 5/6. Let's give this bad boy double strike, and it'll get +1/+0 for every time they cast as well. So say no more. You know, Lizard Blades, Bloodveil Purveyor, it's going to get the job done. Reckless Stormseeker is going to give it haste. We have the Blazing Sky, the new dragon. We have Junji, the new dragon, which is really cool. The Painter to ramp things up. The Thundering Reiju, you know, this is a must-have as well. It's so goofy. 4 mana, 3/3 with haste. Whenever it attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, then deal X damage to each opponent, where X is the number of modified creatures you control other than Reiju. Wow. That is a goofy card, right? So we really like to modify all of our creatures, and that is fairly easily done through the Painter, primarily. And then we have the equipped creatures as well, right? The equipment. A little bit of removal through the Abrade, stuff like that, but not getting too bogged down. I know I'm excited about that deck. Samurais. Okay, so this is pretty goofy. Showcasing a few things here. If a creature attacking causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So this is a samurai build. However, you could still focus in with things like the Overlord, Olivia, Velomachus. These things can all be double triggered for, like, man, the Overlords, for example, would be dealing 6 damage whenever it attacks, and it's a 3/6. You know, Olivia bringing 2 things back, Velomachus playing 2 things for free. It's kind of crazy. But in this deck, you know, we're using it with the Storm's Edge. You know, whenever a samurai or warrior you control attacks alone, untap it. If it's the first combat phase of the turn, there's an additional combat phase after this phase, right? So that's an ability that we could copy as well, which is fairly exciting, right? So a ton of legendary samurais here. And then we have the mirror box, right? So we can play multiple legendaries. They're going to get buffed up, right? Very cool. And that's very, very exciting. So I have high hopes for this. I'm also flirting with the World Tree, right? If you have Maskwood Nexus, the World Tree, and the Mirror Box, it's like, boom, here's my whole deck, let's go. So that could be pretty goofy, right? Super excited about that. Moving on now to Rakdos Reanimator. This is kind of goofy as well. I know I'm using that word a lot here, but okay, the backside of the Mirror Breaker. 2/2 Red Shaman, you make a treasure, that's cool. Discard and draw, that's ideal. And then to pay 1, tap to create a token that's a copy of target, a non-legendary creature you control, except it has haste, sacrificing at the beginning of the next end step. And we will have to manually stack our triggers here with the Dreadfest Demon. This is a 6/6 for 7, flying at the beginning of your end step. Sacrifice a non-demon creature. If you do, create a token that's a copy of Dreadfest Demon, right? So we're making sure that this is first on the stack, last out, and then we can be copying the one that will exile it, or sacrificing the one that will exile itself anyways to make a copy that won't exile itself, which is really, really cool. So that's kind of what's going on here. You know, more recursion through Return Upon the Tide, and then, you know, some ramp and stuff to help us get there, right? Moving on to the Gruel Aggro, you know, kind of sticking with what we know, Jasperia's Sentinel, Magda, Reckless Stormseeker, but then the Thundering Rage you, right? This is going to be very good. We have Helena and Alina in there, Lizard Blades, and the new Springleaf Avenger, which I think is fairly cool, just base value, right? Blazing Sky, I think, is pretty decent here as well, and then Jugon defends the temple. You really just can't get enough of this card. Prosperous Innkeeper, Goldspan Dragon. I think Goldspan Dragon is really good with Blazing Sky if it dies. But, you know, I'm not sold on Goldspan Dragon. If you can see, we've got 41 cards here. Some of these decks do need to be trimmed to 36 main deck, 24 lands for those 60 cards. We're going to get to that, though, tomorrow. Gruel Landfall. Now, this is kind of goofy. Kodama of the West Tree, you know, giving modified creatures trample whenever a land enters, or whenever you deal combat damage, put a land in play, right? We also have the Hot Springs. Entering with counters, you can move a counter to a creature, and modified creatures will have haste. So that's really, really cool. And then, you know, just kind of flooding the field with Brushfire Elemental. You know, Kodama, the West Tree, getting a bunch of land out. Just having as much fun with it as we can. You know, still needs maybe a little bit of work here. We had to do it, though. Hot Springs and Kodama. Trample and haste? How do you not? Rakdos Artifacts. This is fairly fun. Oni Cult Anvil. We can make multiple copies of this as it is non-legendary. Whenever one or more artifacts you control leave the battlefield during your turn, create a 1/1 colorless construct artifact creature token. This ability triggers only once each turn. We can tap it to sacrifice its an artifact in general and deal 1 damage to each opponent. We gain 1 life. Wow. Right? So Lithoform Engine can also copy permanents to make even more than 4 copies of this, which is kind of crazy. The Meat Hook Massacre is going to help that chip damage. And then also things like the Dragon Spark Reactor here. Artifact, whenever it or another artifact enters the battlefield, put a charge counter on it. Pay 4, sacrifice, deal damage equal to the number of counters on it to target player. Damage, which is really cool. So, you know, lots of damage to be done. We've got the burn down the house to deal damage when the things die, which is fairly decent. Moving on to a mono white, which, you know, really doesn't need explaining. There's some new things in here that I'm excited about, though. The Cloudsteel Kiran for 3. It's a 3/2 with flying. If you can equip it, you're not losing, which is pretty decent. It's hard to argue with that. You know, putting it on something with vigilance like the Adeline. So, you know, Adeline's going to be a big creature with flying and vigilance now. I think that is a-okay with me. We also have the Selfless Samurai. We already talked about this. It can sacrifice to give indestructible, which is going to be very, very good. Flirting with the Dawn Sky could be good, could be too expensive. When it dies, look at the top 7, put total mana value 4 or less onto the battlefield. That could very well give us lethal after a wipe, and right, that's why we need to try it. And then, you know, kind of the same old Seed of the Empire, a new card. We can discard it to deal 4 damage. Reducing the cost of it through our legendaries, in which Mono White has a lot of, right? There's Thalia, there's Redain, there's Adeline, AO, which is really, really cool, right? So lots going on there. Mono Black. This is actually looking pretty goofy. Similar to the Ninjutsu without the Ninjutsu. Still utilizing the Moon Sage to play things of our opponents with the cost of life, which is great. And then, you know, it's kind of like your typical mono black deck where it's Meat Hook Massacre, you know, Eye Twitch, Shambling Ghast, Loaf. That's all the same. The Bloodcaster here as well. But what's new is that we have the Tribute, making those rats. You know, that's just fantastic. It's going to go well with the Moon Sage as well. And then the March of Wretched Sorrow within a mono black deck. It's an additional cost, so you can discard black cards, cost 2 less to cast for each one you do this way. Deal X damage to target creature or planeswalker, and you'll gain X life. So this is great when combined with the Moon Sage, right? So Moon Sage, we're paying life to pay our opponent's things, play our opponent. This is what happens with the long video. I start to degrade. I need to recharge. But paying life with the Scion and gaining that life back with the Sorrow, very, very cool. If we're playing their cards, we don't really care about the cards we have in hand if you need to reduce it. So that's kind of what the deck has going on there with the typical mono black built around it. Boros Aggro, the Thundering Reiju, has been included here. What a fantastic card. This is going to go really well with Showdown of the Skalds. We also have the Azari Commander. This is a good card against control decks. Haste, whenever it deals combat damage to a player, if it doesn't have an indestructible counter, it gains one. And then whenever we take combat damage, it'll lose the indestructible counter. Wow. I love a 3/3 with haste that's going to grab indestructible, right? Really good stuff. We have the Angel Fire Ignition to make sure it can deal combat damage, which is nice. The AO, we talked about this. So not too much new included within the deck. The Reiju, the Commander, and the AO. So, you know, doing what we can. Of course, there's new land within the deck as well. Basically new land in every deck. Is it Artifacts? Now, I'm actually kind of proud of this one. So some of these decks are obviously better than others. And, well, this is one of the good ones here. So we have the Mind Link mech that comes out on turn 3. It's a 4/3 with flying, crew for 1 whenever it becomes crewed for the first time each turn until end of turn. Mind Link mech becomes a copy of target non-legendary creature that crewed it, except it's a 4/3, a vehicle artifact in addition to its other types and has flying. So we're going to be crewing the Ifrit Flame Painter for 1, which it has, the toughness of 1. It has double strike, so now we're looking at a 4/3 with flying and double strike. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may cast target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. Exile it when we do. So turn 2, discarding Magma Opus. Turn 3, Mindful Mech. Turn 4, Flame Painter. Crew the mech through the Flame Painter. Double strike, casting Magma Opus. And then, you know, looking for, I guess, something, the Otherworldly Gaze, right? So this is our turn 1. Look at the top 3 cards of your library, put any number of them into the graveyard, right? So we're looking to toss an instant or sorcery card into our graveyard to free cast with the mech as well, right? So kind of just nailing this deck down. Seagate Restoration is a big hope of ours to cast there for free. But again, the Magma Opus is A-okay as well, right? So the Is It Artifacts deck looking pretty juicy. Dimir Ninja. All right, we're getting to the home stretch here. This is pretty goofy. So Satoru allows basically any creature card in our hand to have ninjutsu, and whenever we activate an ninjutsu ability, look at the top 3 of our library, put 1 into our hand, the rest in the bottom of our library in any order, only once each turn, right? So it's a draw engine, and it gives all of our creatures ninjutsu for 4, so we can cast more expensive creatures at a reduced ninja cost, right? So putting in a 7-drop for 4 is going to be the name of the game. We have some itty bitties like the Stowaway, which is unblockable to make sure that we can now get that damage in and then hopefully cheat in a Jintaxis, right? That's going to be really cool, right? It is a 7-drop, and if we can get it into play for 4, how would we not do that? And then we're countering our opponent's stuff. We're copying the stuff that we do, right? Really cool. We have Kato here as well. It can make it unblockable, which is pretty decent. And Discover the Impossible for draw. And then Baleful Mastery for the Exiles. Because I think Exile is going to be fairly important moving forward with all of the Dragon Death effects. Then we have our first budget deck. But don't worry, we have more non-budget decks coming your way as well. This is a Gruel Lands. Crackling Emergence is a new card, turning a land into a 3/3. If it would die, give the land indestructible, get rid of the Emergence. Don't mind that. And then using the Symmetress to give everything trample that has even power and toughness, which is quite nice. What am I looking for? The Keeper is pretty decent here. You know, tapping for mana, as long as it's modified, it will double mana, giving us that ramp, which is really nice. Ramping with the Sequence, Brushfire Elemental, the Hot Spring, Roaring Earth. It really is all about the lands. Master Rebuke for the fight, which is pretty decent. So really just looking to take advantage and beat down our opponent as much as we can with those lands. Then we have a Simic Ninjutsu. Was it Gruel Landfall? Oh, that was budget number 2. Budget number 1, we skipped one, is the Abzan Enchantments. Now, this is fun. So, the Geothermal can bounce an enchantment to our hand. If we do, we'll gain 3 life for 4. So playing Binding of the Old Gods, removing one of their creatures, grabbing a land, and then bouncing it back to our hand. Replaying it, removing one of their permanents, grabbing a land, then bouncing it back to our hand. That's kind of what we want to be doing here. With the Kami, Binding of the Old Gods, we also have Ascent of the Worthy as well, which can bring the Kami back into play, which is really cool, and just kind of repeat this process. Season of Renewal to grab stuff back. Generous Visitor is going to grow, right? Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, put a counter on it. So if we're bouncing the enchantments and replaying them, that's going to be really cool. Speaking of bouncing enchantments and replaying them, whenever it enters battlefield, create a Valkyrie or an angel, and then whenever an angel dies, they have to sacrifice. So really, really cool stuff here. The Gloom Shrieker can grab something back from the graveyard into our hand, which is really cool. So it's really all just about the replayability of the sagas through the Kami and the Gloom Shrieker, right? So really excited about this Abzan budget build. And of course, all of the budget builds have only commons and uncommons in them. Now on to the Simic Ninjutsu. Super excited about this. The Springleaf Avenger has ninjutsu for 4. It's a 6/5, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand, right? So getting in easily with things like Silver Raven, it's a 1/1 you scry. It's going to be bounced to your hand so that scry is repeating, plus it's a flyer through evasion to help us through the ninjutsu. We also have the Stowaway. Quandrix Command can bounce, Fading Hope can bounce. Thousand Face is really cool in this specific build as it can copy a creature, which the Stormleaf Avenger is what it'll be copying, or the Springleaf Avenger. So that's super exciting, having multiple 6/5s. And of course, the Springleaf Avenger can bring back the Thousand Face to our hand, which is decent. Phasing things out if we want, ramping with the Tanuki, and more phase out with the Spectral. So the Simic Ninjutsu is a tempo build that I'm super excited about. And then we have a budget Simic tempo with the Sky Turtle. What's up? This is cool because you can bounce something for 2. You can return card from your graveyard to your hand for 3, or you can play a 6/5 with flying and ward 2 for 7. So a ton of playability here. Same thing goes for the Tanaki, as it can channel to ramp, and it's a 6/5 creature for us. And it is really a channel deck, as we have the Crab. It can channel to counter, plus it's a decent creature. Fading Hope just to bounce. Careful Cultivation. A similar thing here where it can channel to create a token that can ramp, or it can help us on the field with something we already have. Denial for counter and fight. Essence Capture for counter. Delver for damage. And the Hover Bike is super exciting as it's a 2/2 with flash. Whenever it enters the battlefield, tap up to 1 target creature, right? So reducing that damage that we'll be taking while accumulating field state. And then we have the Rakdos Midrange, which I'm still working on. That will be actually our 25th deck here. And then our limited archetypes and limited core cards. So Simic Tempo, Boros Aggro, Golgari Enchantments, Izzet Artifacts, Orzhov Artifacts and Enchantments, Selesnya Enchantments, Gruel Aggro, Rakdos Artifacts, Dimir Ninjutsu, and Azorius Vehicles. The corresponding cards would be the Sky Turtle, Azari's Captain, the Gloom Shrieker, the Enthusiast Mechanaut, the Naomi Pillar of Order, Jackeye Naturalist, I don't know, Invigorating Hot Springs, the Oni Cult Anvil, Silver Fur Master, and the Prodigy's Prototype, right? So all of our multicolored cards kind of lead us to the limited archetypes, and we can build around that. So tomorrow is the last day I have before Kamigawa's release. What we will be doing, holy, that's a lot of decks, right? We will be filling in the lands. We will be trimming the decks to 60. Of course, the spreadsheet is made available for everyone in the description below. Give it a view, and if you're looking for some decks to play, we've got you covered, right? Of course, check out the YouTube channel as well, as we will be showcasing the final versions. And like I said at the start of the video, let me know in the comments below your favorite lists, or I guess ideas, as the lists aren't totally nailed down, within today's video, as it will influence the order in which I produce them to YouTube, as I'm only really doing a couple a day. I'll probably do a few a day to start the season here with the new set, but as we do move on, right, I'm sure that'll slow again. So that was a ton of stuff. Woof. So if you guys enjoyed today's video, make sure to like it, comment, subscribe, share the channel to your friends. That always does help, maybe even support financially by becoming a YouTube member, a Twitch Prime supporter, or even a Patreon, right? Cheers. I hope you guys are excited for Kamigawa. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you soon in the next.